Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The northern night hung heavy over the endless taiga, a frozen wilderness where silence reigned, until it was shattered by the pounding steps of a massive, silver-gray beast. The humanoid wolf tore through the snow-dusted undergrowth, every stride gouging into the frozen earth. Moonlight flashed across his fur, catching in his wild amber eyes burning with despair, confusion, and fury. Behind him, the forest rang with the cries of his hunters. The chase had been going for hours. Eric didn't know how close they were, only that their scent and their voices never faded. His muscles screamed, his breath tore his chest, but he refused to stop. If they caught him, everything ended. His life, his vengeance, and the last remnant of his people. He was the only one left, the last of Frostvik, and he could not fall before his revenge was taken. As he ran, his mind betrayed him, dragging him back to the night his world ended. Frostvik had seemed peaceful, a hidden village where shapeshifters lived apart from the factions, tearing the supernatural world apart. Vampires, hunters, shapeshifters, each despised the others, yet all agreed on one law: secrecy. Frostvik had been safe, far from those wars. Or so he believed. He thought he knew Edda, the human girl raised among them, the one he had loved since childhood, the one he trusted completely, the one who had asked him to watch the stars that night. He remembered hugging her, the warmth in her eyes, and then the sting of a needle at his neck. Darkness. Betrayal. When he woke, chaos consumed Frostvik. Edda's smile twisted cruel as hunters poured into the weakened village. She had poisoned their water with wolfsbane, and when the hunters struck, the shapeshifters could barely stand, let alone fight. Eric had watched in horror from a ridge, powerless, as his people were cut down. His mother, Runa, fought like a storm, ripping through men with tooth and claw. His father, Leifur, fell beneath a hunter's blade, wounds carving him apart. Eric had screamed into the night, reaching for them, but his voice was drowned by death. And Edda had laughed. His grief had broken something inside him. He had felt his body twist, bones reshaping, muscles tearing and rebuilding. His human skin shredded, giving way to the wolf within, fur like silver flame. The beast's instincts surged, demanding he howl, to mourn, to rage, to promise vengeance. He gave in. The howl tore across the frozen forest, filled with despair and defiance. His people heard it, and even in their last moments they smiled. Runa's tears fell as pride and sorrow warred within her. She had lived to see her son survive, yet cursed him for revealing himself to the hunters. That was the night he began to run. Now, hours later, he should have lost them long ago. He was faster, stronger, born for the wild. But the hunters kept pace. His parents had warned him. Humans had their ways, their weapons, their tricks. Only now did he understand. Still, he thought he was pulling away, until the shot. A thunderclap split the night, and fire lanced through his shoulder. His body convulsed as wolfsbane burned his veins like liquid flame. He staggered, howling in pain. Through blurred vision, he saw her. Edda. She stood among the trees, smirk curling her lips, a pistol smoking in her hands. Eric's knees buckled. His heart, already torn, shattered again at the sight of her. The girl he had loved, the girl who had shared his every secret, now smiling as she aimed for his death. Edda, his voice was a growl, broken and raw. For an instant, despair threatened to swallow him whole. Then something colder, harder, rose in its place. Revenge. Clenching his jaw, he forced his legs to move, muscles screaming, veins aflame. With one final surge, Eric hurled himself forward, sprinting into the night with every last shred of strength he had left. The hunt was far from over. At last, Eric understood. Edda had never been the girl he thought she was. She had always been one of them, an enhanced human, a hunter. He felt like a fool for never seeing it. But why betray Frostvik, only to leave him alive? Why poison their kin, only to lure him out onto the stars? Did some part of her still care? Then why was she here, gun in hand, hunting him now? He shook the thoughts from his mind and forced himself to focus. His limbs ached, wolfsbane burning like fire through his veins. His strength was slipping away. If he couldn't find some way to survive, he would fall like the rest of his people. That was when he saw it, through the trees, a strange flicker of light. It hovered without origin, pulsing faintly in the darkness. Maybe it was moonlight playing tricks. Maybe it was madness. But there was nothing left to lose. He veered toward it. The hunters followed close behind, Etta leading them with cruel determination. Eric stumbled into the clearing, his body finally giving in. On trembling limbs, he dragged himself toward the light, its glow reflected in his wild amber eyes. He hesitated. Touching a strange light in the middle of the wilderness might be suicide. But behind him came the crunch of boots, the click of rifles. He reached out. His claws closed around nothing. The light wasn't solid. It slipped through his hand like air. Despair crushed him. His last hope had been a mirage. His body cracked and groaned as he collapsed to his knees, reverting painfully to human form. Naked, shivering, he bowed his head. He was finished. Etta arrived seconds later, panting but smirking. 4 hunters spread out beside her, guns leveled. She looked down at him, blonde hair glowing in the eerie light, eyes cold and predatory. Quite the chase, little mutt. You should have stayed on that ridge and died with the rest. Eric lifted his gaze, drinking in her face one last time. The freckles he used to trace with his fingers, the lips that once spoke kindness, all now twisted with malice. The girl he loved was gone. Why, Etta, he growled, voice raw with pain and fury. Why betray your family? Why spare me only to hunt me down? Was it all a lie? Her grin widened. Family? Don't insult me. I'm human. Pure blood. Did you really think I called dogs like you my kin? She waved her gun casually, her tone laced with venom. Yes, Eric. Every moment with you was a lie. I saved you because I wanted you to suffer, wanted you to watch everything burn before I killed you. His heart broke cleanly this time, no room left for doubt or longing. She had never loved him, not once. Eric drew in a slow breath, his voice heavy but steady. Then finish it. I don't have the strength left to fight. At least make it quick. Etta tilted her head, feigning disappointment. Pity. I was hoping for more of a show. Still, she raised her gun, leveling it at his forehead. But then time shifted. The hunters froze mid-breath. The world slowed, every movement dragging at a crawl. Etta struggled against the invisible weight, inching her arm upward. Her fingers squeezed the trigger as if pressing through molasses. Frustration twisted her features. The light pulsed faster, brighter, until the flickers merged into a single blinding glow. And then time snapped. A thunderclap shattered the clearing. The gun fired, but before the bullet reached Eric, the light exploded outward in a blast of force. The hunters were hurled like rag dolls, crashing into trees or skidding across frozen ground. 4 of them ignited instantly, screaming as flames devoured them. Etta slammed against a trunk and crumpled, unconscious but alive. And Eric was gone. In his place hovered an oval of shimmering light, humming with power. Hours later, the forest was silent again. The oval still floated in the clearing, dimming with each passing minute. Charred patches marked where the hunters had fallen. At last, the oval faded, its purpose spent. Against the tree, Etta stirred, groaning as she clutched her head. She blinked blearily at the empty clearing, catching only the final traces of the light as it vanished. What happened? She whispered into the cold night. Pain, a bright light, heavy vertigo, and then an all-devouring fatigue. These were the things Eric felt directly after time had started moving again. It appeared Etta's last bullet had hit him, as he could feel another wound in his stomach, which was now also spreading wolfsbane through his system, making him groan. Eric was lying on his back, unable to move a finger or even open his eyes. His entire body seemed consumed by a mixture of pain and fatigue. Although the fatigue seemed to be devouring the pain more and more, somehow, Eric doubted that was a good thing. Luckily, it seemed only his body was affected for now, as his mind appeared to be functioning perfectly fine. Eric had no idea what happened. He didn't think he'd fallen unconscious, but whatever ground he was lying on was warm and covered with grass, which meant there was no way it was the ice-cold, permafrost-covered ground that the taiga was known for. He tried to listen to the sound around him to determine his location and see if Edda and her hunter buddies were still around. All he heard were beautiful songbirds and rustling leaves. That said, the sound came to him as though through a bowl of water, muffled and seemingly far away. Muffled or not, they were another sign that he was no longer in the taiga. As the only trees, there were conifer trees with no leaves and very few songbirds. He quickly came to the conclusion he was lying naked on his back in a temperate forest rather than a taiga. Had he really fallen unconscious after all? Long enough for him to be moved far enough away from his home to be in a regular forest? And why would whoever moved him here just leave him naked on the ground? Before he could get lost in his thoughts even more, he suddenly heard voices in a language he couldn't understand. The first voice was that of a young female. Where are we going, mother? /. Eric still recognized the inflection of a question, but he had no idea what was being asked. His parents had educated him in several languages, but whatever this girl was speaking didn't sound like any language he had ever heard. The second voice appeared to answer the first and sounded like a more mature woman. I sensed a powerful magic disturbance coming from here and just wanted to check it out for a moment. /. The second voice did not speak in a language that was any more recognizable, but the first voice quickly answered her in a concerned tone. Shouldn't we wait and get Dad then? What if it's an enemy? There's a reason our kind does what it does. Remember, /. As the voices started coming closer, Eric wondered why he didn't hear any rushing leaves or breaking twigs from people walking. His musings were interrupted by the mature voice's answers. However, /fufufu, your mother isn't completely defenseless, you know. You'll learn in time that even our kind can have an offensive presence in a fight. /. The mature continued nonchalantly. Regardless, I doubt it actually is a powerful being, as the magical energies disappeared almost immediately after they appeared. If I'm right, then it was likely to be /. At this point, Eric started hearing something akin to the fluttering of an insect's wings as a gentle wind started stroking his naked body when the mature voice continued. A teleportation. /. The young voice answered excitedly. Whoa, a naked human male. That's not something you see every day, or ever for that matter. Humans know better than to enter these forests. He seems to be wounded. /. Before the mature voice could respond, the young one continued, her tone turning to confusion. Wait, no. Not a human. He feels different somehow, and yet still distinctly human-like. /. The mature voice answered proudly. Very good, little wisp. You're right. That said, even I don't know what he is. Finding a species I have never seen or heard of is truly peculiar. /. Ever since they arrived, Eric had been trying to speak, but his body was still flooded by fatigue. He couldn't properly open his mouth, and only a long groan leaked out. The young voice spoke up in interest, as if looking at a science project. It looks like he's trying to say something, but why does he seem so weak? Is it his wounds? They seem painful but not deadly. /. The mature voice chuckled. Fufufu. To be honest, I'm surprised he's even aware enough to notice our presence. Go check his soul, little wisp. /. As Eric lay there, trying to fight off the overwhelming fatigue, he felt a gentle, inexplicable touch on his forehead. It was a sensation unlike any he had ever experienced, both comforting and invasive. The voices around him, foreign and mysterious, discussed his fate with a detached curiosity that sent a shiver down his spine. Whoa, /. The younger voice sounded surprised. His soul is a complete mess, and he also seems to be poisoned. Someone really didn't like this guy. I wonder how he ended up that way. /. The mature voice answered in a nonchalant tone. Although Eric couldn't understand what was said, or even see the speaker, he could almost picture the shrug her words came with. Teleportation is dangerous business. The voice began her explanation. Especially for one as weak as him, who must have come from an unawakened world. Not to mention that the magic from that teleportation didn't seem particularly stable. Either way, she continued. He won't live long without help. I normally wouldn't care enough to save him, but his species interests me. I'll patch him up just enough so he'll survive some experimenting. Unaware he had just been reduced to a lab rat, Eric was still trying and failing to banish the fatigue from his body so he could move or at least speak. Unbeknownst to Eric, the younger voice would be his savior today. Wait. I want him. The mature voice sounded astonished. You what? You mean for that? Why? This choice will follow you for the rest of your life. Please think about it a little longer. She continued in a pleading tone. We don't even know anything about his species yet, and there are so many strong races out there. Why pick something so similar to the generally weak humans? The young voice sounded dismissive, likely shaking her head. It has to be now. You know his weakened soul will allow for a stronger bond between us. Besides, saving him now will make building trust easier. Her voice then began to ooze with excitement. Plus, I believe that his species is uniquely suited for that special talent of mine. Those last words appear to spark the mature woman's interest. Truly? All right, so maybe he's a good choice. But why speak about trust? Don't tell me you still intend to follow the ways of those wimps from the Radiant Glade? The young voice sounded helpless. It was you who turned me on to the idea, Mother. I know this wasn't what you meant, but you promised to let me make my own choices. So are you going back on your word? The mature voice seemed to grumble for a while, but then seemed to relent. You know the others will kick you out for this, right? Even I won't be able to change their mind. And I can't come with you either, no matter how much I might want to . Her voice grew sterner. If you do this, it will be you and a man you know nothing about, alone in a dangerous world. Whatever the woman said seemed to have given the younger voice pause. Eric heard nothing for a while, as he could only lay there, while continuing to try and fight the fatigue that had ravaged his body while others decided his fate. Then the young voice sounded again. Fine. I suppose I should at least know something about him. With his soul as weakened as it is, I should be able to read his memories. It wasn't long before Eric felt a finger against his forehead again, which lasted for 5 whole minutes before it was retracted. The young voice sounded again. Interesting. I'm even more sure now, Mother. This man has gone through quite a traumatic event before coming here. I think he has the potential to become the kind of partner I want. The mature voice released a sigh. Fine then. Do what you have to, little wisp. You know I'll support you no matter what. The young voice sounded warm, likely smiling. Family above all, right? The mature voice sounded like she agreed with something. Family above all. Next, Eric once again felt a finger against his forehead, but this time he noticed something else as a voice he could actually understand sounded in his head. Hello there, it began almost cheerfully. Since you don't speak our language and have a little trouble talking in the first place, I will use our souls to speak to you in a more primal language that any soul can understand. My name is Allora, and I have a proposal for you. Eric had to admit that hearing a voice in his head frightened him a little. The supernatural may be real on Earth, but that only counted for shapeshifters, who could transform into various predators, and vampires, who were simply stronger humans with an appetite for blood and an aversion to sunlight. Honestly, the real shapeshifters and vampires were fairly boring when compared to those depicted by modern media. They did have a higher regeneration rate compared to T0 humans. However, at least, that is everything Eric's parents taught him on the matter. Regardless, telepathy was certainly something new for the young Eric, as he genuinely started to lose all grip on exactly what situation he was in. Despite his fear, however, he realized he needed to answer this voice, but had no idea how to. Likely anticipating the problem, Allora sounded again. To answer me, just think with the intention of relaying the thought. I'll pick it up. Eric hesitantly tried to do as Allora had said by thinking at her, "Hello? How are you doing this? Who are you? And where am I?" Somehow, Eric felt like Allora was mentally shaking her head at him. "I told you, my name is Allora. The rest is not important right now. Instead, we should focus on the fact that you're dying." This time, it was Eric's turn to shake his head. "Mentally anyway, I'll be fine. My wounds aren't deadly, and the wolfsbane won't kill me. I just need a little time for my natural regeneration to take care of it." But he received a small, somewhat condescending laugh in return. "Come now. I've read your memories. You're not a genius, but neither are you an idiot. You know this fatigue you feel is not natural." Unfortunately, Eric knew she was right. His parents put him through some intense training to give him the ability to survive. This training often left him wounded and even poisoned by wolfsbane. Yet never before had he felt as strangely disconnected from his body as he did right now. Considering the state of his body, he should feel fatigued, sure, but also pain, and his mind shouldn't be as clear as it is. Yet, right now, his mind seemed fine, while his body felt so heavy he couldn't even open his eyes. After a few moments of silence, he said, "So what are you saying? And what do you mean you read my memories?" Allora giggled with amusement. "Exactly what it sounds like. I read your memories. You see, the state of your body is a direct result of your wounded soul because it is slowly detaching itself from your body." While Eric tried to put aside the discomfort he felt at his memories being read, Allora continued, "It won't be long before your soul loses all grip on your body and dissipates into the air, which, surprise, surprise, is bad for you. Your wounded soul is also why I could read your memories so easily." As if anticipating what Eric was about to ask, she shook her head mentally. "And don't ask me how you wounded your soul. I promise to tell you everything later, but for now, time is limited." Suddenly, Eric felt like she was smiling mysteriously at him. "I have a proposal that will not only help you survive, but help you thrive. Accepting or not is up to you. But I have to warn you, it's not much of a choice, considering the only other options are becoming a lab rat to my mother or death." Eric wasn't sure whether Allora was manipulating him or not, but even if she was, what could he do about it? Currently, he was at the mercy of these two women, and becoming a lab rat certainly didn't sound appealing. He grumbled a little, but after another moment of silence, he asked, "What is this proposal?" He could almost feel the victorious grin on Allora's face as she answered, "Become my soul-bound. Although fairies like myself are magically gifted, we only have access to a specific type of magic called cedar magic, which is not suited for combat." She continued explaining, "Because of this, fairies have devised a way to create a soul bond with someone who will then act as their protector while the fairy supports them with their cedar magic. And I want you to be my protector." Eric decided to set aside his surprise about the existence of fairies for now and instead focus on the actual issue. "I'm guessing the soul bond will heal me." He received a mental shrug. "Not directly, but through the bond, I will be able to heal you." Eric nodded thoughtfully, frowning. "All right, but this is not the only way you have to save me, right? Otherwise, becoming a lab rat wouldn't be an option." Allora chuckled at Eric's deduction. "Clever boy. But you are partially wrong. The only person here who can save you without the soul bond is my mother, and she will definitely use you as a lab rat afterwards. However, if you prefer death over either option, I promise to kill you quickly." Eric fell silent again. He felt ashamed for considering the option of a simple death. He had always been timid and a little apathetic, trying to avoid conflict and going through training mostly to appease his parents. He preferred to spend his time reading. The events orchestrated by Edda may have lit a flame under him for a while there, but now that he was in this situation, he wondered if continuing to live was worth it. Still, there was a small ember inside him, burning for revenge. The question was if he wanted to make a deal with the devil for it. "After all, neither you nor your mother are good people, right?" he asked Allora. Allora giggled cheerfully. "You're right about that. My mother has always taught me to be ruthless towards anyone outside our family. That said," she continued with her lips pursed in amusement, "you should still consider yourself lucky you encountered me. Full disclosure," she sighed, "fairies are divided into two factions, the Radiant Glade and the Obsidian Enclave. While the former is considered righteous and the latter wicked, the main point of contention between the two factions is in how we handle our protectors. She shrugged as she explained, "The glade creates equal bonds, where the fairy and their protector become true partners, but the enclave creates bonds of slavery, where the protector will serve the fairy with absolute obedience." Eric got an ominous feeling when he asked, "Dare I ask which faction you belong to?" Allora laughed at the obvious question with the equally obvious answer. "The Enclave, of course. But I meant it when I said you should consider yourself lucky. You see, like my fellow members of the Enclave, I am plenty wicked, but unlike the others, I prefer the idea of making a bond of equals with my protector." Her voice grew excited, as she had clearly been thinking about this for a long time. "I don't want a slave to do my bidding. What I want is a partnership to last the ages. I want it to be you and me against the world." Her voice was filled with promise of the future. "I want us to stand above the rest, to be king and queen, emperor and empress. I want us to rule hand in hand. So do away with your timidity and become a conqueror." Fire seeped in her voice. "You've already seen the way the world truly is, and I see the rage and fury hiding behind a facade of defeatism. Give in to it. Show the world what you can do, what we can do." Finally, her voice turned to a purring whisper. "With me by your side, you will never be brought so low again. Never again will your fate be in anyone's hands but mine and your own. Just like my fate will be both in my hands and yours." Eric felt himself getting swept up in her enthusiasm, and the fury he had buried after losing all hope when Edda cornered him was once again rearing its head, demanding to be given a say. For the first time since he woke up on that ridge, overlooking the slaughter of everyone he cared about, he felt like there was a clear path forward. Grab this woman's hand, give in to his desires, and step to the forefront. Forget his old self and become someone new. He felt like saying yes then and there, but there was still something he was unclear about. "You still haven't told me why you want me for this." The answer was immediate. "At first, it was just because your species and physiology are ideally suited for my unique talent, something I will tell you about later." She shrugged. "But after checking your memory, I realized you were even more perfect. Although you were initially a little too timid for me, I can see that recent events have changed you enough for me to manipulate you into becoming more like the man I want by my side." Eric actually had a laugh at her words. "You're pretty honest for a wicked person." He could feel her smiling in a conspiratorial manner. "Only to you, my dear protector." Eric fell silent for a few more minutes, but in the end, his newly awakened desire for power and revenge made him long for a new beginning. "It's sketchy, but what's my alternative? Lab rat? Death? Sure, maybe this woman lied to me, but the fact is I still can't move." His inner struggle was short, and with a mental sigh, he decided to accept. "So, how do we create this bond?" He felt Alora's enthusiasm as she said, "Just repeat after me. Through highs and lows, we find our way. A journey marked by night and day. Hand in hand, through thick and thin, our soul's a dance that's set to spin. No force can sever what's combined. Two hearts, one rhythm well aligned. In cosmic waltz, we move with grace. Soul-bound partners forever embrace." As Alora's words echoed in his mind, and he repeated them, Eric felt a surge of energy pulsating through him. The air around him seemed to thrum with power as invisible threads of fate weaved around them, binding them together in a powerful bond. After the bond was forged, Eric noticed some immediate changes. His body became stronger and stopped feeling so damn heavy. Next, a cooling sensation spread through his entire being. He took a moment to marvel at the sensations he was feeling and then tried to open his eyes again. This time, he succeeded and looked at a world unlike the one he had known before. The sky was blue, but the leaves overhead, while still green, sparkled with an otherworldly glow, casting a gentle light over the surroundings. Eric sat up and felt his fingers trail through the slightly wet grass. He quickly realized that the damage to his soul had also dulled all his other senses, but more than that, he felt like his senses were now better than ever before. While indulging himself in this new feeling, he suddenly noticed something peculiar. A seemingly middle-aged woman, whose beauty seemed to be only enhanced by her maturity, was looking at him with no small amount of curiosity. She was short, probably 150 centimeters, 4 feet 11 inches at most, and had red hair, but unlike the natural redheads he had seen in his community, this woman's hair was as crimson as blood, matching her equally crimson eyes. Her breasts were larger than one would expect from her diminutive stature, something that was made abundantly clear due to the mature woman's revealing clothing. However, the most peculiar thing about her was that she had thin wings coming from her back, although she wasn't using them currently, as her feet touched the ground. He quickly scrambled to his feet and scratched his head. He felt a little awkward when he realized this must be the mother who wanted to use him as a lab rat. He looked around, looking for the woman he was now supposedly bonded with, but couldn't find anything, so he addressed the mature woman instead, a little unsure of himself. "You must be Allora's mother. It's a pleasure to meet you." Yet, he still spoke in English, which the woman didn't understand. Her heavy breasts swayed as she chuckled at his awkwardness. "Foo-foo-foo. I have no idea what you're saying, boy, but I can see the fear in your eyes. Allora must have told you something about me. Well, don't worry. Since you are her protector now, your family, and I don't mistreat my family." Then she suddenly gained a cruel twinkle in her eyes as she continued. "But you should remember, you are only family by extension. If Allora ever has enough of you and wants a new protector, I'll be the first to rip you away from her." Despite the woman's diminutive stature and distracting attire, Eric found himself strangely intimidated by her words, as though the world around them resonated with her and pure power flowed around them, giving credence to her voice. He quickly nodded in response before realizing he could actually understand her. Eric suddenly heard Allora's voice in his head again. "If you're wondering why you can understand her, then," she giggled, "and don't worry about her threats too much. She would never harm you without my consent. And I realize how that sounds, but I don't want you to be afraid of me. You and I are partners now. It's the world that should be afraid of us." Eric felt somewhat calmed by Allora's words, although he still wondered if he could trust her. Regardless, he wondered where she was, so he said aloud, "Allora, where are you?" Both Allora's mother and Allora herself seemed to laugh at his words before he heard Allora again. "You could just talk to me in the same way you did before, so you don't need to talk out loud. As for where I am, why, inside you, of course." Eric suddenly imagined some rather unpleasant scenarios and shivered. After all, while limited, he had access to the internet back in his community and had been thoroughly corrupted by it. He quickly heard Allora giggle with amusement. "Inside your soul, you pervert. But if you like those kinds of things, I don't mind experimenting." Eric quickly shook his head and replied, still out loud, "Nope, not necessary," causing Allora's mother to raise an eyebrow in surprise, but remained silent as she seemed to prefer observing. Allora sighed with exaggeration. "Fine, you spoil sport. I think I'd probably prefer to be the one getting stuffed anyway." Eric blinked even as a slight grin appeared on his face. Suddenly, he imagined his future with this Allora might be even more interesting than he thought. If she looked anything like her mother, he was looking forward to it. He quickly shook his head, clearing his mind of perverted thoughts, and asked Allora hesitantly, "So, can you read my thoughts?" He sighed in relief when he received a negative response. "No, but I can read your intentions." And the perverted intent behind those thoughts was clear. Eric coughed a little, still needing a little more time to lose his timidity. He then asked her, "So, are you stuck in my soul now? Can you leave it? What happened to your physical body?" Allora giggled seductively. "Want to lay your eyes on my divine body, do you? Well, don't worry, you'll get your chance. I'm just working on repairing your soul right now. As for my physical body, it's currently been merged into yours." She smiled confidently. "I'm sure you've already noticed your senses being more powerful than before. In fact, every aspect of your body should have been improved. This is one of the ways we fairies aid our protectors." She continued with wryly pursed lips. "Another benefit is that my presence in your soul will enhance your affinity with magic, which, by the way, is very bad. Like weirdly bad. I don't know if it's you or your species, but I'd be surprised if you could even feel the presence of Ethereum in your current state." She exclaimed in exasperation. "I can't even find affinity." But then she continued enthusiastically. "Luckily for you, I'm here now, with my presence in your soul. You'll be flinging magic with the best of them. When I leave your soul, my body will also unmerge from yours, and we will be two separate entities again, although still connected." Eric was still reeling from all the information. Still, one thing stood out to him, something that Allora had mentioned before. "What do you mean with magic and Ethereum exactly?" Allora giggled at his endearing ignorance. "We'll get to that later as well, just like our face-to-face meeting. For now, however, can you ask my mother to lead us to our home?" Still being a little timid, Eric just nodded and decided to go with the flow for now, which was probably the smart thing to do anyway. He relayed Allora's words to her mother, whose name he later learned was Morgani, and she led them through the forest and into a slightly darker, but still eerily beautiful part of the forest. With that, his journey into a new world began. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It was now 7 years later. 7 years of Allora and Eric traveling alone. As expected, Allora had been banished from the Enclave for betraying their traditions. Only Morgani's influence as an Enclave elder prevented them from being killed instead. During these 7 years, Eric learned many things, including the fact this wasn't Earth, but instead another planet called Sol, something he had obviously suspected already. He learned about magic, the universe as a whole, and even the most likely reason for him ending up in this place. When he first learned about that, he wondered what Earth would look like right now. But over time, thoughts of Earth became less and less frequent. Even his desire for revenge had been forcibly suppressed because he simply had no way of returning to Earth. The ember representing his newly gained desire for power had now turned into a burning bonfire, mainly through Allora's work to shape him into the man she wanted as her partner. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In a large, luxurious hall located somewhere on Sol, heavy footsteps echoed. A 210-centimeter tall, 6 feet 10 inches, humanoid wolf casually trudged through it in an upright manner. The creature had gray-silver fur adorned by patches of black in the form of lightning bolts. His eyes were the color of amber and seemed to burn with a feral, indomitable will. His body was clad in an ebony armor that appeared to absorb the light around it, while his body moved with predatory grace. Sleek yet formidable, the dark plates clung to the creature's form, enhancing his presence. The armor left the palms of his elongated, clawed hands uncovered while moving over the back of them to cover his claws in a metallic sheen. His wolfish feet, however, were fully covered in metallic sabotage and were the source of the heavy metallic steps echoing through the hall. Occasionally, the footsteps became muffled when the wolf stepped into puddles of blood gathered from the various bodies scattered around. Some of them were burned with strange markings across their skin. Others had gashes reminiscent of claws, and yet others seemed to have died from heavy concussive force. The wolf, obviously Eric, kept casually walking through the hall until he eventually reached a door and knocked on it with his free hand. "Open up, buddy. Your guards are all dead. Don't make this harder for yourself." Eric stood in front of the door while carrying a large, two-handed warhammer on his shoulder, holding the shaft with his clawed hand. The weapon was imposing and clearly designed for both brute force and precision. The head was forged from gleaming steel and adorned with an intricate, howling wolf on one side and the wing of a fairy on the other side. One side of the head was flat and imposing, ready to crush all opposition. The other side featured a vicious and sharply pointed spike, able to pierce through armor and deliver devastating blows to opponents. The shaft was crafted from a combination of dark wood and metal, intricately wrapped in leather for a secure and comfortable grip. A panicked voice came from inside. "D, don't come in, you monster. I'll kill the boy." Eric scoffed. "No, you won't. You're too much of a coward to get rid of your last chance for survival. Now, if you don't open the door, I'll open it for you." He picked up his hammer in both hands, and at the same time, lightning danced around his claws. It quickly spread from his hands to the hammerhead, which now looked like it was encased in a cage of lightning. He stood off to the side and swung his hammer in a wide arc with all his strength, causing a loud explosion when he hit the double doors squarely in the middle as several purple magic circles appeared. But Eric just curved his wolfish lips into a menacing smile and put more force into his swing. Meanwhile, even more lightning leaked from his hands and into the hammer. Before long, the first magic circle broke, and with the first one gone, the second quickly followed, and then the third. It was mere seconds before the hammer crashed against the door's wood. It made a crisp, breaking sound and shattered into hundreds of splinters that shot into the room behind it. Eric stepped past the door's remains and said the first thing that came to him. "Here's Eric." He had seen movies, too, back on Earth. Behind the door was a luxurious bedroom with a fat, middle-aged human woman holding a knife to a young elven boy's throat who looked terrified of his situation. The woman screamed, "Damn you. I don't know what you are, but don't come closer. I'll do it." Eric had quickly learned that neither shapeshifters nor vampires existed in this world. There were beast men and women who came close, but they didn't really transform like he did, and instead always looked the same. Plus, most of them were more like humans with some beastly features rather than looking like full-on hybrids, as Eric did. Because of this, he quickly got into the habit of hiding his uniqueness by only transforming when he was already planning on either killing everyone who saw him or making sure they were weak enough that Allora could wipe their memories. Allora also used their connection and her cedar magic to hide his body's peculiarities from any powerful people who might try and use their magical senses to look a little closer at Eric's physiology. The werewolf smirked confidently as his body suddenly started creaking. His bones and muscles rearranged themselves under the terrified gazes of the fat woman and the boy. As Eric grew stronger and his body was enhanced through Ethereum and Allora's unique ability, his transformation to, and from his wolf form, became much quicker and smoother. In less than a second, he was back to human form. His armor had reshaped itself to fit this form as well, now fully covering his hands, as even the leg part now accommodated his regular human knees rather than his wolf form's inverted ones. If anyone who had known him back on Earth were here, they would have difficulty recognizing him. Most of the kindness and all of the timidity had disappeared from his eyes. Eric was a handsome man, and even without his transformation, he still stood at a height of 2 meters, 6 feet 4 inches. Combined with his broad build and the obvious power hiding behind that armor, he looked like a human tank. His silver-gray hair grew to just below his ears while looking unkempt and wild. His face was slightly square, and his piercing amber eyes were intimidating. A short, well-kept beard in the same color as his hair adorned the lower part of his face. Putting his hammer down and leaning on the shaft, Eric wore a sly grin as he looked at the woman in front of him. "Never mind what I am, Lady Ironheart." Barely resisting the urge to mock the woman for her unfitting last name, Eric continued, "This can go a number of ways. The boy's parents didn't specifically require your death, so just hand him over to me, and you can go." He narrowed his eyes, and his tone became threatening. "But if you harm him, I'll have no choice but to kill you so that I can at least get some compensation for my hard work. And if you think I'll let you walk out of here with the boy in hand, you must be a bigger idiot than I already believe you to be." Over the last 7 years, Eric and Allora had mostly done a lot of mercenary work. It paid very well and allowed for plenty of opportunities to grow in power. Despite Allora's ambitions, there was no grand plan besides growing stronger for now. Currently, they had been contracted by a wealthy elven family, whose son had been kidnapped by the fat tub of lust in front of him, who held some official title from the local ruling power that made her think she was invincible. It was a situation they had already encountered multiple times, with only the races and genders changing on a case-by-case basis. Still, it was good money, so what do they have to complain about? The woman seemed hesitant as she looked past Eric at the many corpses of her guards and gulped. "Why? You'll let me go." Usually, she would try to intimidate Eric by quoting her status and the many people who would come after Eric for this, but she had already tried and failed to intimidate Eric this way while the man was slaughtering her guards. It wasn't that some of those people who would come after him didn't have the ability to kill Eric. In fact, in the grand scheme of this world, Eric was still pretty weak. It was just that he would already be far away from here, heading to the next kingdom, by the time they found out what happened here. Eric shrugged. I have no reason to kill you. I just need the boy. The woman nodded. Hey, all right, I'm coming that way. She dragged the crying boy with her while keeping the knife against his neck until she stood in front of Eric, shaking a little. Eric grinned demeaningly and moved to the side while saying, Leave the boy. The woman's eyes shifted nervously between Eric and the freedom that lay behind him. Finally, she quickly nodded, removed her knife from the boy's neck, and carefully started moving past Eric. He watched the woman casually, not making any moves to harm her as she squeezed past the formidable Eric and quickly broke into a sprint when she reached his other side. The boy immediately hid behind Eric, seeing him as a safety shield. Eric patted the 15-year-old boy on his head with his left hand before he turned a little and raised his armored right. The raised hand began to crackle with lightning as Eric looked at the fleeing back of Lady Ironheart while his lips curved into a contemptuous smile, as if I would leave a disgusting bitch like you alive. He swiped his lightning-clad hand, and 5 curved lightning tears ripped through the air before slicing into the fleeing woman, killing her on the spot. He looked at the boy and noticed he looked a little dazed. He asked Allora, who was currently occupying his soul, Is it done? He quickly received a reply, Yep. He won't remember a thing of your wolf form. And I also removed some of the memories of his time with that woman. Eric gasped sarcastically. Why? Allora, are you growing a heart? Allora snorted as if insulted. Don't say such disgusting things. Who knows? Maybe I just made it so that his memories will return to him in nightmares. Anyway, be sure to get some additional reward for the kindness. Eric chuckled softly, confident that he had at least slightly affected Allora in the last 7 years. He was just preparing to leave with the boy when Allora suddenly warned him, Careful, a large concentration of Ethereum is heading this way. Eric raised an eyebrow and prepared for battle when the room started rumbling. Suddenly, a shining oval appeared in midair. Before anyone could react, chains rushed out of it, wound themselves around Eric, and dragged him towards the oval. Eric yelled, What the fuck? Then, he stabbed the pointy tip of his hammer into the wooden floorboards while gripping the handle firmly in an attempt to stay in place. But it was no use. The chains yanked forcefully, causing Eric to release his grip on the hammer. He was pulled into the light, kicking and screaming. It all went by in less than a second. The boy just gawked at the now empty space beside him, before realizing he was now all alone. Darkness had descended upon the affluent neighborhood of Hampstead in London. Its once elegant mansions and manicured gardens had now fallen into disrepair and were covered in an otherworldly black mist. The source of this darkness was a single figure clad in a shadowy veil. Their features were hidden as they stood on the porch of a large estate in disrepair. The mansion walls and windows were dirty and cracked, as if they had already seen many fights and had not been properly tended to for a long time. The porch was originally made of pearly white marble, but now looked no better than the rest of the mansion, littered with cracks, dirt, and blood. The once well-maintained greenery had overgrown much of the structure, actually somewhat making up for the dirt and cracks. Several creatures, ranging from humans to vampires to various shapeshifters, were gathered before the figure. These creatures stared with somewhat glassy eyes toward the long, downward-sloping driveway leading to the entrance gate. The gate had been broken open, and a similar gathering was taking place there, except they had no shadowy figure among them, and their gazes were clear. These groups seemed to oppose each other as the humans in this group appeared to be releasing their own aura, slightly pushing back the darkness. One of these humans, a man with black hair and brown eyes, stepped forward with a serious frown. He addressed the shadowy figure in a loud voice laced with righteous fury, as if having practiced it in front of a mirror. Emily Ashcroft, the council can no longer turn a blind eye to your atrocities. Release these poor people of their bonds and surrender. The figure responded with a surprisingly young female voice and a slightly crazed tone. I won't give up my home. It's mine. Mine. That pointless counsel of yours can go to hell. Her voice only rose in octaves as she continued. All its members are hypocrites anyway. A year ago, they were all still fighting, raping, and looting with the best of them. And now that they've banded together, they intend to swing their various dicks and tits around by trying to force their rules on me. She laughed wickedly and shook her head. Forget it. The only way I will leave this place is if I'm dragged by my cold, dead feet. The man sighed, seemingly saddened by her refusal, but there was a peculiar glint in his eye. Please, Emily, this isn't you. Let's forget what happened in the past. I still remember when you were a cute little girl running around these gardens. Please give yourself up, and I promise to take care of Emma. His voice seemed to contain a carefully hidden emotion that only Emily could pick up on, causing his words to spur her on even more. She started cackling madly. You? Protect Emma? Did you forget what you tried to do to me when our parents died? To both of us. I certainly doubt you forgot what I did to you that day. At the mention of this encounter, the man himself seemed to seethe with anger as his left hand drifted towards his crotch unconsciously. Emily pointed at the man accusingly. I would sooner kill her than leave her with you. I can only trust myself. Only I can protect my house. Protect Emma. And if you stand in my way, you will die. Her voice seemed to get more irrational and crazed as she went on. Meanwhile, the people behind the man directed strange gazes towards him. However, the last 7 years have been chaotic, and each of the people here had done things they weren't proud of. They may not have had much say in the council's formation, but now that it was here and enforcing its rules, they all had to abide by them, or at least pretend to. They were all given a grace period during which they could put an end to all their newly illegal activities, and afterwards, the council wouldn't pursue them for crimes committed in the past. But Emily refused to stop creating more slaves. Protecting her home and Emma seemed to be the only thing she cared about, which was why they were gathered here now. Regardless, the man speaking was their boss. Whatever he did in the past, they couldn't be bothered to care, so they averted their eyes and refocused on Emily. The black-haired, pasty-looking man barely managed to bring his anger under control and make one last attempt to have her surrender. He might not be able to get his hands on Emily anymore, but he still had a shot at Emma. That said, he would prefer not to risk his life for it. He took an outwardly reasonable tone. Be reasonable, Emily. Even with these poor enslaved souls, we still outnumber you. Neither you nor your sister will be harmed. The council wants to bring back the humane treatment of criminals. Seeing that these men and women intended to keep hounding her, she ordered her slaves to attack. Enough. If you refuse to leave, then I'll make you. At those words, the glassy eyes of the various creatures in front of her started glowing with a malevolent darkness as their lips curled up into cruel smiles. Immediately, shapeshifters on both sides changed forms and various runic symbols appeared on their fur. Vampires drew weapons while gaining similar runic symbols on their pale skin, and various magic circles appeared in front of human hands. Then they all charged. The clash began with a chaotic display of magic, claws, and fangs. Various human-predator hybrids moved with savage ferocity. Vampires danced with vicious grace, and humans tossed around numerous kinds of magic as the two groups clashed in a frontal battle. While the attacking forces first attempted to simply knock the enslaved creatures unconscious, this eventually proved too difficult, as the woman named Emily had also started attacking. She flung around bolts of darkness, quickly eroding any defenses they came in contact with. The sounds of explosions and the tearing of flesh echoed across this once prestigious neighborhood. Once the first casualties started falling on both sides, the battle soon started turning in favor of the forces opposing Emily, as their numbers were simply greater. Emily seemed to be losing more and more of her reason as she screeched at the invading forces and gathered more and more darkness around her, seemingly preparing for something. However, no one noticed that a bright light had started appearing right in the middle of the battlefield. The light began pulsing faster and faster and reached a boiling point at the same time as Emily's efforts. A familiar scene then played out as time slowed down. No one understood what was happening when they suddenly started watching everything move in slow motion. Tendrils of darkness had gathered around Emily, which seemed to be moving towards the people opposing her, but they went at a snail's pace, just like everything else. Then, time moved again. A massive concussive force was released as everyone flew back from the light. Emily was no exception to this. However, her tendrils moved forward, apparently unaffected by the blast, as they homed in on the now airborne attackers. Unable to defend themselves, they easily got skewered. Less than half of them died this way, but those remaining quickly retreated and regrouped, hesitant to attack again and concerned about what had just happened. The number of defenders versus attackers seemed to have evened out as both sides stared at each other, wondering what to do next. The black-haired man from earlier seemed to have survived, but he was unwilling to retreat now as he tried to convince his men to attack again. Unfortunately, they seemed unconvinced. One of them grabbed the man's shoulder. "Listen, Liam, we don't know what that power was just now. She seemed to have been affected, too, but we just don't know enough. We can't attack like this. Let's just wait for the council's warden to arrive." In the end, caution won out as the attackers retreated for now, perhaps to gather new allies in order to outnumber the defenders and compensate for Emily's high level of power. However, Liam refused to leave without getting the last word, as he yelled across the lawn, "We'll be back, Emily. Don't think you've won today." Meanwhile, at the location of the explosion, no oval of light remained this time, but an armored Eric was lying unconscious in the middle of the battlefield, his hands empty. The gate and estate entrance were at a lower altitude than the house entrances, so the attacking group hadn't seen the body that had appeared there. It appeared that this teleportation had been even more violent than the previous one, as he was not even conscious now despite his increase in strength since the last time. With the attackers having left, for now, the only person remaining to approach Eric was a wounded Emily. Her veil of darkness had left her as a young but pale-looking woman appeared. She approached the unconscious Eric warily, clutching her side as if wounded. But when noticing he was completely out, her lips curled up in an evil grin. "I don't know who you are, little bug, or what you did, but it seems you helped me out today. I wonder what I should give you as a reward." She seemed to think mockingly for a moment while tapping her chin as if not really considering it, and then seemed to come to a conclusion. I'll turn you into my newest slave. You should feel honored." About an hour later, Eric had been hoisted up and chained against a wall by his wrists as a sweating Emily stood next to him with two of her minions. They were located in a stone basement without windows and several wooden wine racks shoved against the side walls. Clearly, this place had once been a wine cellar, but now had nothing left to be called as such. Emily complained out loud. "Sheesh, you're sure making me work for it. Little bug, you'll need to show me how to get that armor off you later." She dismissed her two minions with a wave of her hand and then grinned at the still unconscious Eric. "The work will be worth it, though. You look positively delicious. I don't think I've ever enslaved a second ranker like myself." She gathered a dark power in her right hand before coalescing it into a magic circle and moving it towards Eric's forehead. Her lips curled into a wicked grin as her hand touched her latest victim, and she felt the mental connection being formed. The process would take some time, but before she could truly get started, something unexpected happened. Suddenly, she felt like a third mind had entered the equation. A playful giggle echoed in her mind, followed by the words, "Thank you for opening your mind to me. I'll enjoy riding in your body for a while." As Amelia's face contorted in fear, wanting to scream, but being unable to, she felt her mind become engulfed in darkness. Her last thoughts wondered if this was how her victims felt, but despite her evacuated mind, her body remained upright. She waved her hands, causing something akin to a floating puddle to appear in the air, which Allora used as a mirror to inspect her new prize. Emily had long, straight black hair that cascaded down her shoulders like an obsidian waterfall, framing her pretty face. Her pale skin was adorned with inked patterns covering her arms and peeking beneath the edges of her clothes. Yet it was her eyes that demanded the most attention. They carried a fierce shade of red that seemed to pierce through anything they laid their sight on. She stood at medium height, barely reaching Eric's shoulders, and her worn, slightly torn clothes resembled a goth rocker ensemble, complete with a patched leather jacket and spiked collar. Clearly, this girl embraced the rebel lifestyle. Unfortunately for her, she was now little more than a puppet to Allora, at least for the moment. She dropped Emily's clothes and continued the inspection, roaming across the young woman's body with her hands, inspecting every nook and cranny, making sure to grab a handful of the firm, D-cup breasts that hung from her chest. She grinned gleefully. Yeah, this will do fine. She even has a darkness affinity. How rare and delightful. These tattoos are weird, though. They don't even serve a magical purpose. I might remove them later. She looked over at Eric and sighed. You really have bad luck with portals, my love. Luckily, your soul protected me during the teleportation, allowing me to save you in turn. Her full lips curled into a playful smirk. I'll need to check this girl's memory to figure out where exactly we are, but in the meantime, you look awfully enticing like this. Perhaps I should have a little fun with this body. While Eric had forbidden her from using her puppets to have vaginal sex with him without their freely given consent, something she had reluctantly agreed to, there were plenty of other fun things she could do. She moved closer to Eric, and with a swipe of her hand, she removed his armor. It wasn't so hard to take off. You just needed the right authority, something only Eric and Allora had. Well, that, or overwhelming power, of course. She looked at Eric's powerful, naked body as she felt herself heating up while her gaze was slowly traveling downwards until it reached the still flaccid, but already 6-inch-long penis, causing Allora to heat up even more, as she couldn't help but become horny. Although they had danced around it for a little while, it hadn't actually taken long after they met before Eric and Allora having sex. A lot. This naturally led to a lot of experimenting, where they discovered each other's likes and dislikes. She looked at the chained-up Eric and giggled mischievously. While this scenario was far from what they both enjoyed the most, that didn't mean she couldn't play around a little, especially when she thought about what it might lead to. Allora had no objection to using Emily's body for this. After all, she didn't generally care about anyone except her family in the first place. Not to mention that Emily had just tried to enslave her love. Plus, using another's body like this actually added another layer of pleasure for her. After all, her original body was still merged with Eric's, and she could share his senses. She was now almost done healing the damage to Eric's soul, which meant he should be waking up soon, and Allora knew just how to wake him up. Sensually, she strolled over to her love and protector. When she stood next to him, she stroked his chest, sucked on his neck a little, and started slowly pumping her hand up and down his large shaft until it stood at full mast, now having grown to a size of over 9 inches. She looked at it with lust and sank to her knees before she started licking Eric from base to tip. She kept looking at his still, unconscious face, waiting for him to wake up. When it took too long, she decided to test this body's gag reflex, but quickly noticed that Emily had likely never done this before. Something which seemed reasonable, considering who she was, but Allora was surprised that Emily hadn't even used her slaves as living dildos since a quick check told her Emily was a virgin too. It was then that Eric woke up to the pleasurable feeling of a wet mouth around his dick. Without opening his eyes, he said, "Couldn't wait this morning, huh, Allora?" But when he felt his chained-up hands, he frowned and opened his eyes as the events leading up to his unconsciousness returned to him, making him realize he wasn't actually in bed together with Allora. When Eric saw a strange woman slobbering over his dick, he was confused for a moment, but when he noticed his connection to the woman, he quickly realized what was happening. Observing the actions of his wife and partner, Eric understood she had already taken the necessary steps to secure their safety. So he got his legs under him and leaned back against the wall he was chained against, intent on enjoying the wet mouth and smooth tongue sending tingles along his spine. He didn't particularly enjoy being chained up, but he didn't mind letting Allora have her fun, especially because they both knew why she was really doing this. He grinned playfully. "I don't know where we are, Allora, but I see you've taken the liberty of playing with my captor. You do remember we already tried to play like this, and decided neither of us particularly enjoyed it, right?" Releasing Eric from her mouth, Allora looked up and curled her lips mischievously. Yeah, but I couldn't help myself. I want to test this body out a little. When she was done, she quickly swallowed him again, attempting to train Emily's throat. However, Eric was quick to remind her why she was actually doing this as he groaned a little from her attentions. Don't lie, my wicked little Ember. I know what you want. I might even give it to you. Allora smiled seductively as she stood up and took Ivor's cock in her hand again as she slowly pumped. Oh, I don't think you are in any position to give me anything right now. Perhaps I just enjoy watching you squirm a little. Although Eric was getting closer, he was still far from done, or from squirming, for that matter. So while he groaned a little from the soft hand around his shaft, he had no problem continuing the conversation. He grinned confidently. Don't make me laugh. You had your chance to turn me into a weak little plaything, but you went the other way instead. Now it's too late, and you're stuck with me. Allora laughed softly as she whispered in his ear, A girl can change her mind, can't she? With those words, Allora moved her left leg across Eric's dick, moved her arms around his body in a hug, and gripped his cock with her thighs as her, or rather Emily's, wet pussy rubbed against the meaty pole. Suddenly, Eric had a much harder time remaining silent as he groaned from the feeling of a wet pussy and thick thighs gripping him. Yet, this time, he was joined by Allora's moaning as she felt a combination of the stimulations to Emily's pussy and Eric's dick. Despite the increased pleasure, Eric was still a while away from finishing as he raised an eyebrow at the moaning Allora and Emily's body. Don't forget the rules, Allora. Allora sighed in an exaggerated manner, even as she kept moving and moaning. Why? Yeah. No vaginal penetration with my puppets, unless they gave permission first. Although Eric had been corrupted quite a bit by Allora, having sex with what was basically an unconscious woman was still a little much for him. That said, he didn't mind playing with them a little, at least when it came to women who had either tried to kill or enslave him. And being chained in a basement told him plenty about this woman's intentions. That's not to say they never had sex while Allora possessed someone. After all, it's not like it was impossible to find women willing to let Allora and Eric do whatever they wanted with their bodies, at least for a time. Back on Seoul, there were actually several women who could be considered as friends with benefits, but very few of those relationships had any real feelings involved in them. Allora only occasionally joined in, but she had agreed not to touch any of these women without Eric there. He had developed a powerful sense of possessiveness towards Allora and really any other woman he considered as his. Fortunately, Allora had no problem with this and, in fact, quite enjoyed the feeling. Having reassured himself that Allora remembered the rules, he returned to focusing on the relaxing pleasure that was soothing his body's aches. It wasn't long after that before both Eric and Allora started reaching their limit, something that Allora naturally took notice of as she panted in Eric's ear. Yes, so? Are you ready to squirm for me yet? Eric's lips curved into a lustful grin, barely holding himself back, made easier by knowing what was to come. And no, but I'm about ready to give you the real reason you started this to begin with. She continued to move as she brought them both closer to the edge while whispering, Oh? And what's that? In response, Eric just grinned knowingly and ripped apart the regular iron chains holding up his wrists. Clearly, Emily had never kept anyone particularly powerful down here, as these chains could, at most, hold first-rankers. Aggressively, he grabbed Allora in Emily's body and used his superior strength to swap positions and press Allora against the wall he was just chained to. Allora had a crazy smile on her face as she just started panting harder while Eric manhandled the body she was occupying. Seeing the look in her eye, Eric smiled lustfully, grabbed her by the throat, and pushed 2 fingers inside the girl's pussy, careful not to break the hymen, and quickly brought the already edged Allora to a squirting orgasm. Eric grinned at the still shaking Allora. This is what you wanted, isn't it? With Eric still holding her by the neck, Allora could only grin and nod a little. It was true. Although Allora was playful and domineering most of the time, while having sex, she actually preferred to have Eric use what she referred to as his idiot strength to dominate her physically weaker body. It was just a game, of course, and they both enjoyed a large array of different kinds of sex, but if they had to pick a favorite, it would be this specific scenario for the both of them. Eric suddenly released her, causing her to drop to her knees as she still felt weak from orgasm. Of course, this put her face right in front of Eric's large and erect cock, which had already been on edge for a while now. She smiled and opened her mouth invitingly as she looked up at Eric with eyes that dared him to make a move. Eric naturally answered her provocation by grabbing her head and shoving himself inside the woman's mouth as deep as he could, which wasn't very deep, unfortunately, at least not without doing permanent harm to Emily's body. Still, he was able to push himself slightly into her throat and, already being on edge from before, quickly came into it after no longer holding himself back. Large globs of cum pumped into Emily's untrained throat. While Allora was used to the large load, Emily's body was not. Thus, Allora was forced to cough up most of it while the rest went straight into the girl's stomach. Eric grinned with contentment as he stepped back and looked at the mess he had left behind while Allora lay there panting and with a slightly drunk look. Deciding it was time for the next step, he crouched down next to her and said, "Now come out and face your fate with your real body." But Allora just grinned provocatively at him. "Make me." Eric chuckled at her attempts to make him use more force as he reached inside his soul, grabbed the part that belonged to Allora, and pushed it out into the real world. Since their bond was one of equals, he naturally had the right to allow or disallow her presence in his soul. After pushing her out, his body also weakened a little as small specks of light left him and merged into the 160 centimeters, 5 feet 3 inches, tall ethereal beauty that was Allora. Her eyes sparkled a mischievous green as her crimson red hair cascaded from her head down to her shoulders and onto her back. 2 transparent wings, colored in a blend of purple and pink hues, sprouted from her back, exuding an otherworldly glow. Her ears were pointy and peeked through the veil of her radiant crimson hair, giving her an otherworldly charm. A radiant red jewel adorned her forehead, casting a subtle glow that accentuated her mystical aura and was a gift her mother had given her the last time they met. She wore her usual outfit, which she created by magic despite their current situation for the express purpose of having it ripped off her. It was a green and copper-colored corset, embracing her short but voluptuous figure and covering only till about halfway up her breasts, leaving her arms, shoulders, and collarbone exposed, while a short skirt covered her lower body till about halfway to her knees. On her left breast, above her heart, a small mark in the form of a howling wolf's head could be seen, matching the small fairy wing in the same place on Eric's body. These were the symbols of their bond. Allora looked him defiantly in the eyes, while wearing a cocky smirk as if daring him to wipe it off her face. Eric happily obliged by wearing a wild grin as he grabbed her corset right in the middle of her full breasts and ripped it off her in one swift motion, causing it to simply disappear into a cloud of light specks. Allora's expression changed to one of mock surprise and outrage as she turned around while hiding her large breasts and gasping, "You brute." Meanwhile, she stuck out her full and perky ass in Eric's direction as if asking him to spank her. Eric rolled his eyes at her behavior, but couldn't help getting excited by it. He growled menacingly, "I'll teach you not to have fun with my chained-up, unconscious body." He used one arm to shove Allora's upper body against the wall, careful to avoid her wings. Then he grabbed her arms and lifted them above her head, where he used one hand to hold them there as he used the other to lift her skirt. He raised the same hand and delivered a loud slap on her buttocks, causing Allora to moan, "Yes, dominate me with your idiot strength," even while she was still grinning. It may sound somewhat demeaning for either of them, but they both knew it was all in good fun, and in the end, that was simply the relationship they had. Eric was by no means an idiot, but where he was a powerful fighter and physically strong, Allora was smarter and more magically gifted than him. He delivered another slap as he growled, "Bratty girls like you need to learn to obey their man." Allora moaned again, "Why, yes. I'll be a good girl. Please teach me to be a good girl." Eric continued to spank her, but until they became glowing red orbs, and Allora was leaking like a faucet from her pussy. While he had somewhat calmed down after coming down Emily's throat earlier, he was now once again rock hard and aching to plunge himself into Allora's inviting depths. Knowing Eric could barely hold himself back, Allora turned her head, flushed from excitement, but still wearing a playful smirk as she moaned seductively. "Come on then, punish me with your monster cock. Imprint my body with your mark." Her face clearly said she would never change her ways no matter what he did, but Eric was fully prepared to try anyway, as his cock was still wet from earlier, and Allora was more than ready to receive him. So he plunged himself inside her depths with one swift stroke. While Allora's height was low, her wondrous cave had long since adapted itself to Eric's length, making sure there was enough room for him to bottom out in her as he lodged his full 9 inches inside her and thrust up against her womb. They released simultaneous moans and groans as Allora finally found herself getting stuffed, while Eric was always momentarily stunned by the perpetual tightness of Allora's inner walls. As Eric continued to force Allora's hands above her head and against the wall, he used his other hand to caress Allora's still red, warm, and ever so firm ass cheeks while he slowly began moving. Allora's tightness made it hard to move inside her, not helped by the fact that Allora herself did everything she could to squeeze her pelvic muscles as hard as possible. But in the end, there was a reason Allora enjoyed this play, and it was Eric's size combined with his physical strength. So Eric plowed through, literally and figuratively, continuously skewering Allora's body on his large shaft. Her wet tunnel felt amazing as the soft and tight inner walls massaged him with great care, sending shivers of pleasure along his spine and almost making him blow his load right there. But he was determined to, at least temporarily, wipe the smirk off Allora's face, so he had to hold on. He kept hammering her, as he groaned with every push, and Allora moaned like a whore, but still without losing her smirk. Eric grimaced at the effort, but he would make her come first or die trying. He changed their position by releasing Allora's hands and grabbing her throat instead before he pulled her up against his chest and put his other hand on her lower belly, where he could feel his large cock deforming Allora's flat stomach. The feeling of immorality and dominance he got from that was great enough to almost finish him then and there. Still, he held on as he could see that Allora was no different when her smirk finally began to waver, and her face started becoming lost in pleasure. Allora moaned louder and louder as her inner desires came out more and more. "Why, yes. Do it. Take whatever you want. Conquer your empress. Make me submit." Her words spurred Eric on as he grinned and started moving faster in and out of her while softly squeezing both his hands, cutting off Allora's air supply a little while also tightening her vaginal canal even more. This action was the one that caused Allora's pussy and body to immediately start spasming in a rocking orgasm, which Eric prolonged as long as he could before being unable to resist Allora's grip on his shaft and coming deep inside, flooding her womb. As Allora felt herself being filled up, she had another orgasm and now wore a silly smile, having truly lost her smirk, at least temporarily. After he was done, Eric could feel his legs giving out on him from the strain of having rough sex, despite the fact his body still hadn't fully recovered from his most recent ordeal. While panting and with his last bit of energy, he took Allora into a princess carry, turned around, and leaned against the wall before slowly sliding down until he sat on the cold stone floor with Allora lying on his chest. They stayed in this position for a while longer as they panted and tried their best to regain some semblance of sanity before Eric suddenly chuckled between pants. "So, do you submit?" Allora still had her face lost in pleasure, but managed to squeeze out a cheeky grin while still panting anyway. "Nope. Try again next time. Maybe actually do that thing I like." Finally regaining his breath, Eric laughed at her words. "I'll be happy to try again, but you'll regret those last words. You always say you want that, but afterwards you feel sore and make me promise not to do it again." Honestly, Eric enjoyed this play as much as Allora, but they both knew she would never truly submit. And Eric didn't want her to either. In fact, neither of them wanted the other to submit. Having servants was pretty easy for someone with their power, but having a true partner to love and treasure was rare. Allora shrugged and giggled, also having regained her breath. "I have no idea what you're talking about." causing Eric to roll his eyes at her. Allora suddenly snapped her fingers, conjuring a thin wave of energy that washed over both her and Eric, cleansing away the grime, sweat, and various bodily fluids before snuggling back into his chest. Not bothered by her actions, Eric instead answered her question with a sigh, while shaking his head side to side, as if in defeat. Sure you don't. Anyway, it always surprises me how much you like this particular play. Allora just shrugged with a content smile. Is it really that surprising? From a young age, I got enamored with the idea of creating a power couple between myself, the beautiful but wicked planner, and my then fictional love, the handsome, powerful, and ruthless conqueror. Her smile turned seductive as she poked Eric's chest. Not so fictional anymore, of course. Eric laughed softly at her words and the ticklish feeling on his chest. I'll try to live up to your expectations. I'm not sure I'm much of a conqueror yet. Allora snorted pridefully as she thrust out her chest and nodded contently. I know you won't let me down. I have absolute confidence in my ability to choose the right person. Anyway, I fantasized many times about what our sexual relationship might be like, and because I like the idea of dominating others, I figured it would be the same here. But instead, it just felt weird to me, as if doing that destroyed the image of the mighty conqueror I wanted you to be. Meanwhile, I'm pretty sure I had my first orgasm to thoughts of being conquered by you instead. She chuckled a little, and from there, it was a downhill slope for me. I do still love to dominate those sluts you have fun with, though. She put a hand on his chest and sat up before looking in his eyes with a loving smile. Besides, I trust you to keep this stuff in the bedroom. Even if I like being manhandled by you when we're having sex, I know you'll never treat me as anything less than your empress outside of it. Despite her usually playful and wicked attitude, she could often be quite sweet with Eric, making him appreciate her all the more. He returned her smile. Of course I won't, my little wicked ember. I would never want you to be anything else. Little Wicked Ember was Eric's nickname for Allora, referencing her crimson hair and personality. After staring at each other for a few more moments, Allora suddenly seemed to get embarrassed and used her wings to fly upwards. Anyway, you've been sitting on your ass long enough. We need to get moving. Get your armor back on while I check that bitch's memories to find out where we are. Having seen the world outside this wine cellar, Allora was already suspicious about not being on Sol anymore. And she even had an idea of which world this was, but she naturally had to be sure, as this would be quite a big deal for Eric. Eric chuckled at Allora's ability to switch from playful to romantic to embarrassed to demanding. Still, he was used to this, so he stood up while smiling and shaking his head. Meanwhile, Allora had shrunk her body to about the size of Eric's hand and flew off towards the unconscious Emily. Fairies have a lot of control over their size, but they all have a maximum and minimum. This form was Allora's minimum, while the 160 centimeters tall busted beauty was her maximum. Finally having a moment to himself, while Allora delved into Emily's memories, Eric took the opportunity to explore their surroundings. He couldn't shake the impression that they were in the dilapidated wine cellar of a noble fallen on hard times. Attempting to push these thoughts aside, he approached the armor lying on the ground, ready to equip it. However, just as he was about to start, a hesitant voice interrupted him from behind. We're on Earth, Eric. You're home. Eric's mind froze as he stopped in the middle of his actions when the events from 7 years ago flashed through his mind. When Eric heard Allora's words, his heart skipped a beat. Time seemed to freeze as a surge of emotions rushed through him. 7 years of suppressing his pain, loss, and seething desire for retribution now threatened to erupt. His fists clenched involuntarily, nails digging into his palms as the floodgates holding back his emotions began to crack. While Eric stood frozen as feelings he had suppressed for the last 7 years started resurfacing, Allora looked at him anxiously, wondering if she had done the right thing in telling him immediately. She knew she would have to tell him eventually, as he would just find out himself anyway. Unfortunately, they both needed at least a few days to recover fully from the teleportation, and she didn't know if she could stop him if he decided to rush straight to the site of his old community. Still, If their partnership was to last the ages, there could be no lies between them, even if it was for their own good. A real partner would tell it as it is, and then stand by the other to pick up the pieces if they fucked everything up. So, instead of continuing to doubt herself, she decided to continue searching through Emily's memories in an attempt to find any reason she could use to convince Eric to stay a little longer, assuming she couldn't reason with him. Meanwhile, Eric's fierce amber eyes gleamed with a dangerous intensity, the fire of vengeance reigniting within him. His jaw tightened, teeth grinding against the memories that fueled his anger. He felt part anticipation at the chance to get revenge and part sorrow at the idea of confronting Etta. After all, despite the hatred he bore her, she was still his first love and someone he grew up with, someone he may have even obsessed a little over. Not that he would hesitate when the day to face his past finally arrived. No, Etta deserved to die, and he would unflinchingly deal the finishing blow. Eric stood frozen for another few minutes as he slowly internalized the knowledge that he was back on Earth and might get his revenge after all. Eventually, he relaxed his hands and jaw and released a long breath. He felt himself take back control as he remembered his current situation. Now that he was back, revenge was not impossible anymore. That was good enough for now, as rushing off would be more likely to get him killed before he could even find a bitch. So, back on Earth, huh? He mumbled. I feel like someone is fucking with me, sending me to Seoul and then pulling me back to Earth, just when I started to adjust to life there. Fury was bubbling just under the surface, but he kept it contained for now. No matter how much he wanted to get revenge now that he had the chance, he could see the same thing as Allora. They were not ready. Allora released a breath of relief, glad that he seemed to be keeping himself together. Then she nodded in agreement. We still can't be sure if you ending up on Seoul was an accident or not, but getting pulled back here definitely wasn't. Eric agreed, and continued putting on his armor while talking to Laura. Where are we exactly? Seems to be a place called London, she answered with a curious tone. It's very different from the place you grew up that I saw in your memories. I mean, even before this world began its awakening. Eric raised an eyebrow in curiosity. So, you and your mother were right? Earth is currently awakening. He finally finished putting his armor on, followed by Allora landing on his shoulder while she nodded. It seems so. We'll need to be careful for a few days. If this girl's memories are correct, then there are more second rankers out there than I would have expected. Even this bitch is one, just like you. Then she frowned with concern. I suspect there might even be a few third rankers. Plus, we are not in the best of shapes. I had to spend a lot of energy taking control of her and healing your soul, which, by the way, has been stitched together from an even worse state than when we met. She looked at him seriously. Remember, I may be a third ranker, but I have no offensive magic to speak of, and I can't forcefully take possession of someone with her power. So had she not opened her mind in an attempt to enslave you, I would have been unable to do anything to her. I know. Plus, I lost my hammer. Eric sighed, regretfully. He had actually taken quite an interest in forging back on Seoul, enjoying the peace he felt when working on his creations. That hammer was his greatest result so far, and also the first one he crafted together with Allora. Right. So can I assume you'll keep your cool for a few days? Despite your obvious desire to run off in search of Etta. Allora asked cautiously, wanting to be sure. She was usually mischievous and playful, but she knew when to be serious. Heavy footsteps sounded as Eric walked up to the stairs leading out of this basement while he chuckled. Yeah, don't worry. We seem to be in some kind of residence. Why don't we have your new slave show us around? Since we need to recuperate for a few days, might as well do it here. Ugh, Allora groaned. I was afraid you'd say that. Eric blinked in surprise. I thought you wanted to wait as well. Yeah, Allora slightly whined. But you're a bleeding heart, and there's this cute, innocent girl in the building that I'm pretty sure you'll want to save. Although Allora's efforts had significantly increased Eric's indifference toward the lives of others, she had yet failed to bring him to her own level, as he still had some care left for the innocent and the young. Cute girls in trouble were a particular weakness of his, even when it came to humans. The fact was, although there was a brief period on Seoul where he had trouble being around humans, it didn't last long. Living in a world with as many different species as existed on Seoul, He eventually realized that hating an entire species was as pointless as idolizing a different species. Now, he focused his hatred on the people behind the attack on his village, not the species. But Allora had come to terms with that by now, and she knew he wouldn't appreciate it if she kept his information from him. How do you mean? Eric frowned. I'll show you, all right? She sighed in response. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It was now about half an hour later as Eric and Emily stood before a closed door while Eric held a bundle of clothes in his hand and Allora sat on his shoulder in her smallest form. After Allora had informed Eric about the girl, Allora used her magic to clean the glassy-eyed Emily and had her put her clothes back on. Then she had Emily lead them out of the basement and into the mansion proper. They hadn't encountered anyone, as it seemed Emily kept her slaves in another part of the mansion. Not that it would have mattered. With Allora in control of Emily, that basically made all those slaves hers now. First, Allora had Emily lead them to a bedroom, where Emily grabbed some women's clothes and stuffed them in Eric's hands under his confused gaze. Is this girl naked or something? He asked her, curiously. For starters, yeah, Allora shrugged, making Eric raise an eyebrow in surprise. But you'll see for yourself if you go through that door. She then flew off Eric's shoulder and took place on top of Emily's head instead. Anyway, her name is Emma, and it's probably best if you go in there alone since you're the bleeding heart between the two of us. She pointed downwards and continued. She's this one's sister, but I doubt she'd be much more comfortable with Emily's presence. Eric only got more curious, but started to suspect this Emma might not be in a good state, as he decided to simply follow Allora's suggestion and walk towards the door with anticipation before extending his hand in an attempt to open it, only to be met with the resistance of a locked door. He looked behind him in exasperation as Allora giggled. Clearly enjoying the little prank she pulled before she had Emily take a keyring from her pocket and toss it to Eric. He caught it and turned around with a sigh while shaking his head before opening the door. However, nothing could have prepared him for what he found on the other side. On the other side of the door was a dimly lit room, shrouded in an eerie atmosphere that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It seems to have once been a study, as there was a desk with a chair moved against one of the walls, while another one of the walls was a library with several damaged and dusty books stored in it. The furniture was sparse, as what little there was, including the desk and chair, were worn and showed signs of neglect. The large windows were covered by heavy, moth-eaten curtains that allowed only a feeble amount of light to pass through. The room's centerpiece was an ominous-looking, large magic circle with a pillow in the middle. It seemed to pulse with dark energy, and Eric quickly recognized it as an Ethereum infusion sigil, something he had seen many times on Soul. It was a little crude, but the fact Emily had managed to draw one was still a testament to her talent. Still, that didn't explain how she had gotten her hands on something like this. While much of an Arcanist's path to power was one of self-discovery as they explored their internal mystic glyphs, he highly doubted Emily had discovered this method of increasing Ethereum gathering rates all by herself. But this was something he could discuss with Allora later, as his gaze and thoughts were pulled toward the corner of the room, where he heard some muffled sobs. What he saw shocked any remaining desire to rush off in pursuit of revenge straight out of him. It was a malnourished, terrified, and naked young girl chained to the wall. She lay on a bed in the corner with tears in her defeated, empty eyes that seemed to stare into nothing as a collar enveloped her neck with a chain that connected to an iron ring coming out of the wall next to the bed. But that wasn't all. Her hands and feet were bound together with rope, and a gag had been placed in her mouth, not allowing her to move, talk, or even wiggle away from the bed. Her mismatched eyes, one green and the other white, suddenly swiveled and looked at Eric. It seemed to take her a moment to come back to life as she began to realize a large, strange man was standing in the room. Eric looked quite dangerous and terrifying in his heavy black armor, broad build, large stature, and fierce amber eyes. Immediately, the girl's eyes became filled with terror as she frantically shook her head. She made panicked, muffled noises and tried to move as far away from Eric as the chain and ropes would allow her. Eric looked at the girl with astonishment, feeling a whirlwind of anger and pity well up inside him while thinking about Emily doing this to her own sister. After his own taste of betrayal 7 years ago, he was particularly sensitive to such things. Despite his feelings, he had to admit that the girl was quite pretty, even in her current state. Her mismatched eyes were alluring and mysterious, while her long white hair distinguished her. She seemed to be somewhat short, and combined with her malnourished body, Eric had difficulty telling her age. She was certainly at least 16 or 17, but might as well be 20. It took him a moment to realize he should probably do something, but he quickly fought the urge to just rush to the girl and free her, as he realized that might scare her even more. What this girl needed right now was for him to remain calm and tell her exactly what he was going to do before he did it. Not only would this show her he could be trusted, but it would also make her feel like she had some control in this situation. After regaining his calm, he looked at the terrified young girl with a look he hoped was comforting and reassuring. "I'm going to approach you now." He had to remind himself to speak English instead of Silvari, the language spoken on Seoul. It had been quite a while, after all. Luckily, his parents did teach him several languages. The young girl, obviously Emma, was consumed by terror as she watched the scary man approach her. She didn't know who he was, how he got here, or what his intentions were, nor did she know what had happened to her sister. All she knew was that this was the first time since Emily had begun tying her up here that she had seen anyone else enter this room. Despite her terror, a small part of her strangely felt like she could trust this man, but she barely noticed this foreign feeling as her fear drowned it out. She even found herself hoping her sister would suddenly return, in spite of the way Emily had treated her in the last couple of years, because at least Emily was the devil she knew. However, despite her attempts at moving away from Eric, it was pointless. The chain attached to her collar was already strained to the limit. She couldn't even cover up her naked body due to her tied-up limbs. By the time Eric stood in front of her, her rapidly pounding heart, combined with her overwhelmed mind, threatened to make her faint. But then Eric slowly crouched down in front of her with a concerned expression. This expression made Emma calm down a little, as Eric didn't seem interested in harming her immediately. Still, she was hyperventilating through the gag in her mouth as her mind raced and tears continued to fall from her eyes. Eric wasn't sure what the best way to approach this situation was, but he decided to continue as he had been. He held up the clothes in his hand, which he now understood the purpose of, and said, "I'm just going to put this down here," before gently placing them down on the bed beside the girl he understood was Emma. After he was done, he looked the girl in the eye, making sure not to let his gaze wander over her naked body. While he certainly was interested and wasn't enough of a gentleman to ignore a naked woman's body when it was right in front of him, the current situation simply wasn't the right time. He realized this girl was feeling extremely vulnerable right now, and he needed to show her he wasn't here to rape her or enjoy her body in any other way. Continuing to look her in her eyes, he said, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'll remove those ropes now, all right?" He didn't make a move as he waited for the girl's permission, which was another way to make her feel like she had some control over what happened to her. Emma was unsure what to feel about this situation, but she felt comforted by the fact this man didn't seem to be interested in her naked body as he continued to look her in the eyes with those fierce amber eyes that seemed to become more comforting by the moment. Realizing he had asked her a question and was actually waiting for her response, she initially felt confused, wondering if this was some kind of trap. But after a few moments of silence, she took the risk and nodded. Seeing her response, Eric continued to look into her eyes as he grabbed her hands and started undoing the ropes binding them. When he was done, Emma immediately covered her modest breasts while Eric moved onto her feet. After all her limbs were freed, she quickly pulled her legs against her chest and used her hands to remove the gag from her mouth. Then, she wrapped her arms around her legs protectively. However, she didn't use this opportunity to speak as she warily stared at Eric, wondering about his next move. While his actions so far had calmed her down a little, she was still far from feeling comfortable. Eric smiled at her, trying to be as comforting as he could. "My name is Eric, and you must be Emma." Seeing her nod but remaining silent, Eric continued, "That's all right. No need to say anything." He then produced the keyring that Emily had tossed to him and asked, Do you know if the key to your collar is on this thing? While he certainly had the strength to destroy that collar by force, it probably wouldn't help to make Emily more comfortable with him. A tiny sparkle of hope appeared in Emma's eyes as she quickly but meekly nodded. In response, Eric simply put the keyring next to her, assuming she would know which key would unlock it. Emma looked at the keyring. She felt a little dazed as her dreams of obtaining the key to her collar suddenly became a reality. She had been wearing this thing for years now, as Emily had one day put it on her and only ever hooked or unhooked the chain that linked her to the wall. Tears once again welled up in her eyes as various bottled-up emotions were starting to come out. She quickly looked up, intending to thank the perhaps not-so-scary man, but realized he had disappeared, the only proof of his visit being her freedom and the clothes on the bed. She just smiled. Suddenly, the future looked a little less bleak. A heavy weight settled in his chest as Eric left the dimly lit room. Meeting Emma had stirred something within him. Empathy, a shared pain of betrayal by people who were supposed to care for them. Just a few minutes ago, before he entered that room, his mind had been engulfed with fury and thoughts of revenge, showing how even 7 years later, he still couldn't shake the echoes of his own past. The scars of Edda's betrayal and deception were still etched into his memory. The haunting atmosphere in that room lingered in his thoughts. The eerie energy that came off those walls had seemed to seep inside him even in those few moments he was in there. He couldn't fathom how Emma had endured for who knew how long without losing her mind. Then again, perhaps she had lost her mind. It's not like Eric had had a real conversation with the girl. Thinking about this caused a surge of anger to flare within him, directed at the one responsible for Emma's torment, Emily. The thought that a sister could inflict such treatment on her own flesh and blood ignited a fiery resolve inside him. A resolve to protect Emma and ensure she found some solace after her years of anguish. After all, when Edda betrayed him, he had Allora to help pick up the pieces, so perhaps he could do the same thing for Emma. He might not be able to erase the scars of her past, but he hoped to be a promise of a future less bleak. He looked up to see Allora, still sitting on an empty-eyed Emily's head as she looked at him with playful curiosity, having felt the many emotions surging through Eric's mind through their bond. As Eric looked at Emily, he felt fury bubble up again as he suddenly charged at her with a balled-up fist. Allora just giggled mischievously as she quickly flew up and pretended surprise. Oh my! Reaching Emily, he punched her heavily in her stomach as she slid back and hit the wall, where she crumbled down to the floor, but without ever losing the empty look in her eyes. Eric still panted a little with anger, but seeing Emily's glassy eyes remain the same quickly made him lose interest in continuing, something Allora also reminded him of. She flew back to Eric and sat herself down on his right shoulder with a chuckle. I expected you to be angry, but you know you're just beating up an empty doll, right? I have her mind completely locked down. She doesn't even feel it. He turned his head and looked at Allora, a little annoyed at her indifference towards Emma, but used to it by now. He also realized that he probably wouldn't care that much either if it wasn't for his own past. But now, he felt an empathy he wouldn't usually feel for just another of the many sob stories that existed in the universe, partly because of Edda's betrayal, and partly because it was much harder to not to care about something so pitiful when it happened right in front of him. However, there was this weird feeling in the back of his skull that made him think there was a little more going on. Were these feelings really only because of his past and proximity? Deciding to think about this later, he growled and answered Allora, so give her back her body for a moment. I want to have a conversation with the bitch. Allora shrugged. I can do that if you like, but I'm not sure if you could really consider it any different. Eric looked at Allora with confusion. How do you mean? In response, Allora rolled her eyes at him. She knew he was an idiot, but he sometimes made her feel like he was by letting his emotions overwhelm his critical thinking. Luckily, she was there to remind him about the importance of thinking things through. Come on, my love. You know this. Think. Her behavior, the Ethereum infusion sigil in that room, the dark, oppressive feeling you felt there. I told you she tried to enslave you, right? How do you think she tried to do that? You have all the clues right in front of you. After Allora mentioned all these things in a row, Eric suddenly realized she was right. How had he not seen this before? Sure, these things were rare, but he still should have thought of it. After all, there weren't many affinities with the power to enslave, but darkness certainly was one of them, and the creepy atmosphere in that room was another clear indicator of Emily's affinity. He sighed as he looked at Allora with love. "What would I do without you, Allora?" Allora giggled as she returned his gaze. "I'm sure you'd be fine. Plenty of people out there are living fulfilling lives with only their idiot strength to guide them." This time, it was Eric's turn to roll his eyes. It would certainly be a much simpler life. Seeing him like this, Allora pouted, flew up, enlarged herself, and hugged Eric while looking up at him with big puppy eyes. "No, we both know you would miss me." A suggestive glint entered her eyes as she smirked a little and continued. "Maybe you can punish me again later?" Eric chuckled and hugged her back. "Of course I would." Then he matched her suggestiveness. "But I'll take you up on that punishment thing." He redirected his attention to Emily, who was once again standing straight while remaining lifeless like a doll. The fury in his eyes had been mostly replaced with pity. So, darkness corruption. Huh? I wonder what she used to be like before Ethereum came to Earth. Many affinities had the ability to affect their users' minds, some in a more profound manner than others, especially so for the rarer and more powerful affinities. This effect was called corruption, which sounded worse than it really was, as most elements only had a minimum effect on people, and with many of them, the changes were more positive than negative. For example, while Eric's lightning could increase his recklessness, it could also make him more resilient, adventurous, and energetic. Unfortunately for Emily, darkness had more negative than positive effects. While it could make her more adaptive and resilient, for the most part, darkness corruption had the nasty habit of twisting positive emotions into something unrecognizable. Allora let go of Eric and turned back into her smaller self before taking her place on Eric's shoulder again while swinging her legs. "Yep, it's truly rare to see someone like her." Eric nodded. On Soul, he had only ever heard about such people, but never actually met one. Usually, those with darkness affinity, or really any rare and powerful affinity, would either be old and powerful or young and heavily protected by their family or teacher. Neither were people he would have easily met during his time as a mere low-level mercenary. Although Allora supposedly met a few people with rare affinities when she still lived as the beloved daughter of a powerful Obsidian Enclave elder. A life she gave up when she decided to make her own future together with Eric instead. He turned his head towards Allora, deciding to inquire about the memories she had seen. "So what was she like before? And how did she end up this way? I know that darkness corruption isn't a sure thing, even for those with that affinity." Having expected his question, Allora nodded. "That's true. People with an affinity for darkness need to be very careful, but they don't have to end up like Emily here. The main problem is Earth's current development phase, combined with that sigil in her room." The fairy shrugged. "She actually used to be a kind and determined young girl. I think you would have liked her." Then, she seemed to think of something. "Should I just share her memories with you?" Eric nodded. He wanted to see what happened to these two sisters with his own eyes. Being familiar with the process, as they had done this before, he sat down on the ground while Allora disappeared into a cloud of light specks that merged with Eric's body. Sharing her mind with Eric was easier when she was in his soul. Not long after that, Eric felt the familiar pull of memories that were not his own as he slowly became lost in them. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The memories started 7 years ago, on the fateful day that changed the lives of everyone on Earth. It was the 5th of September, 2023. In the lavish living room of her parents' expansive mansion, 16-year-old Emily lounged on a couch. Her rebellious goth rocker attire, complete with heavy mascara, black lipstick, and purple highlights in her already black hair, clashed with the opulence around her. While it seemed she aimed to defy her parents' affluent lifestyle, like so many of her peers, Emily didn't harbor negative feelings toward her family. Her parents, Isabella and Oliver Ashcroft, were kind to her, after all. Her father was a little absent, but although they didn't exactly approve of her lifestyle and clothing, they didn't try to stop her either. Instead, they chose to simply love and support her, while hoping this was just a phase she would grow out of. although they never mentioned that last part to Emily, of course. Even her 11-year-old sister, Emma, who embraced their parents' expectations more willingly, couldn't elicit any animosity from Emily. She did try. Hard. For a little while. Anyway. Eventually, she found it almost impossible to continue having negative feelings about Emma, as the girl's personality and looks were far too much of a cheat. In moments when Emily was distressed for any reason, Emma's warm hugs and sparkling mismatched eyes, filled with love, had the power to dispel any darkness in Emily's day. Something that remained true even during Emily's earlier attempts to distance herself. Currently, Emma was sitting next to Emily with a happy smile on her face as she held her big sister's hand. Her outfit much more appropriate for the room, as she wore a cute little white dress that went well with her long, white hair. Despite Emma's smile, however, Emily was scowling as she was forced to attend a meeting between her parents and a pasty, black-haired friend and business partner of theirs, Liam Astor. The large room held 3 couches, set up in a triangle formation, where Liam occupied the sofa on the girl's right, and their parents were sitting on the left. Their attendance wasn't even really required, as it was just a friendly meeting to catch up, but unfortunately, their absence would have been against etiquette. So here she was. She especially hated her current situation because she had always hated Liam. Not because he was unfriendly, but because he was always looking at her with lust, which disgusted her. Of course, her parents never believed her, as Liam was always a perfect gentleman to both them and their daughters, making them think Liam was a decent man who wouldn't have such thoughts about the underage Emily. Unfortunately, they were wrong, yet the truth of the matter would never be known to them. While Isabella and Oliver were talking with Liam as the sisters simply sat quietly, everyone suddenly felt a shift in the air and a buzzing in their ears. They all had different reactions to this. Liam and Emily suddenly felt energized and powerful, while Isabella and Oliver felt the same at first, but the feeling quickly shifted to uncomfortable. They felt like their blood was heating up. Meanwhile, Emma looked at their various reactions with confusion. Surprisingly, she didn't seem to feel anything at all. She tugged on her big sister's sleeve. "Big Em? What's wrong with everyone?" But Emily didn't answer, as she and Liam kept looking in wonder at their hands, marveling at the new and strange feeling of power. But Emily was quickly torn away from her thoughts when her parents suddenly started screaming and grabbing their heads. But before anyone could react, under the shocked gazes of their daughters, they combusted, quickly reducing their bodies to ash. Emily and Emma froze at the sight of their parents' sudden death, their minds failing to come to terms with what had happened as they stared at the burned patches that used to be their parents. Meanwhile, Liam entirely ignored the death of his supposed friends as he continued to stare at his hands, his mind reeling with possibilities as he suddenly started to chuckle. Emily and Emma had shakily made their way to where their parents used to sit as they touched the still warm spots. Emma began to cry silent tears as her body had already realized what happened while her mind was still catching up. Meanwhile, Emily mumbled, "W, what just happened?" It all happened much too suddenly and quickly. One moment, she was sitting on a couch, angry at her parents while trying to find a reason to leave. The next, a strange power was coursing through her body while her parents combusted and turned into burned patches on a couch. When she noticed Emma was in shock and crying, however, she quickly got herself together and took Emma in her arms before turning her away from what used to be their parents. "Don't look, Em. I don't know what happened, but we'll figure it out, all right? Together." Emma was still too much in shock to respond. But while Emily was busy dealing with her little sister and the sudden death of her parents, Liam had been exploring this foreign feeling as instinct compelled him to draw a strange symbol in the air. It appeared like concentric circles adorned with symbols that seemed to materialize from the depths of his consciousness. The strangest thing, however, was that the lines actually appeared, if not in the air, then at least in his mind's, as he looked with astonishment at the earthen brown lines that instinct compelled him to draw, while to anyone else, he simply looked like a lunatic waving his finger around. The reality, however, was that more than 1 billion people were doing the exact same thing all across the world. When he completed the final stroke, he felt tired, as if he had just run a few miles despite not moving from that spot. Additionally, a subtle resonance hummed through his body. He could feel a connection, a palpable link between the runic pattern and the very essence of his being, causing a dormant power to stir within him, resonating with the runes as they seemed to slowly disappear. But instead of panicking about this, Liam started chuckling louder and louder as he felt the runes being etched into him. He hardly even cared how or why this happened, as all he could think about was the power he felt surging through his body, while his chuckling slowly got louder until it turned into belly-rumbling laughter. He turned his gaze towards Emily as he felt like life had just given him everything he wanted on a silver platter. Power in women. Still lost in thoughts and attempting to comfort Emma, Emily had completely forgotten about Liam's existence until she heard him laughing loudly. She turned to look at him, seething with anger about this blatant disregard for his supposed friends' deaths. But before she could say anything, she was shocked by Liam's crazed and lustful expression. His laugh had turned into mad cackling as he half yelled, "Finally! Finally! Life has given me what I deserve. True power. I don't know what God or coincidence or whatever gave me this opportunity, but I'll kiss their feet in thanks." Seeing his expression and hearing his words, Emily knew the situation was bad as she quickly backed away while keeping herself between Liam and Emma. What are you thinking, you perverted asshole? Didn't you see what just happened to my parents? We should be figuring out what's going on." She did briefly consider the possibility that Liam had somehow caused this, but when she thought back on his normal behavior before this started and how strange it all was, she quickly discarded that possibility. Seeing her actions, Liam only laughed harder as he started closing in on the sisters. "Oh, I know what's going on. I've just been given the opportunity to finally teach you a lesson." His voice took on a dangerous edge. "You'll find out how much I enjoy teaching rebellious little shits like you to obey a real man. Your sister is a little young for me still, but that just gives me time to mold her into the perfect little slut." A little taste of power seemed to have driven Liam half mad. He felt like nothing else mattered anymore. With this power, he could do whatever he wanted. Laws were pointless. All would bow before him. Naturally, reality was very different, but he would only find out about that later. Seeing Liam continue to advance on her and her sister, Emily realized he had lost all reason, meaning both her and Emma's fates would be truly pitiful if he caught them. She quickly turned around, wanting to run, but seeing Emma, she realized her sister had barely noticed anything of her interaction with Liam, as she was clearly still in shock over their parents' fate. But she had no time. Liam was taking his time walking up to them as he was drowning in the arrogance that came from gaining a little bit of power without knowledge or wisdom, but he was still getting closer. So Emily did the only thing she could think of. She slapped Emma across the face and yelled, "Em, we need to run. Now." Feeling the sharp pain and noticing her sister's urgency, Emma blinked once and then just nodded, causing Emily to grab her hand and pull her along in a sprint to the door. Liam gleefully watched their actions as the idea of chasing these scared girls only excited him. After all, the mansion was big, they were relatively far away from the front door, and most of the windows here were far too old and large to be able to open. Not to mention that even if they did get outside, it would still be at least another few hundred meters to reach a place where there might be other people. There weren't even any other people in the house. The Ashcroft family only employed a gardener and some cleaning staff, none of whom were live-in servants and had already gone home for the day. Besides, he was invincible now. However, he couldn't let the girls go without giving them a taste of his new power. He curled his lips into an evil grin and reached inside himself to mentally touch the strange symbol that had been etched into his whatever it was. He instinctively knew what it was meant to do, but that didn't make it any easier to control as he pointed his right hand forward, and an earthen brown magic circle appeared floating in front of it. He felt power flowing from somewhere in his body towards the circle as he tried to will it into taking the shape he wanted it to. Luckily for the sisters, he failed miserably. An earthen pillar shot out of the floor, shattering the floor tiles, but instead of appearing in the sisters' path like he wanted, it appeared under one of the sofas, launching it in the air and nearly causing it to land right on top of Liam, who quickly jumped back in fright. His face twisted in anger as he was quick to put the blame for this squarely on the power and the sisters rather than his own inexperience. "Damn it, come back here, you bitches. I'll teach you not to distract me." But the sisters didn't even look back. They heard the crash, and while Emily wondered what was going on, but simply focused on running, Emma barely even registered it, as she was currently following her sister on autopilot while her mind was still having trouble catching up on recent events. Emily's heart pounded as she reached the door with her sister in tow and crashed through it before considering where to go. She had two choices: either head for the front door and run to the street, hoping to find someone to help them, or head upstairs to the panic room, where she could lock Liam out while alerting the security company the Ashcroft family had entrusted their safety to. Hearing Liam's footsteps behind her, she had to make a quick decision and decided to go for option 2, for the simple reason that her 11-year-old sister simply couldn't run very fast, considering her age, size, and current mental state. In other words, the chances of Liam catching up to them were far too high if she and Emma had to run all the way to the street. So she tightened her grip on Emma's small hand and sprinted through the extensive and opulent hallways toward the closest stairs. Seeing the sisters run in a direction other than the front door, Liam was momentarily confused before he seemed to have a thought and grinned knowingly, apparently unconcerned with their actions as he followed them at a leisurely pace. While following them, he continued to cast his earthen pillar in an attempt to become more accurate with it, causing pillar after pillar to shoot out of the floor, smashing into the walls and furniture all along the hallways. This time, some of them actually managed to obstruct the girls' path, forcing them to swerve around them. Emily felt forced to look back in astonishment as she didn't understand where all these pillars were suddenly coming from. What the fuck is going on? However, all she saw was Liam's disgusting grin and a strange earthen brown circle floating in front of his outstretched hand. Shaking away her astonishment, she quickly refocused on running as she decided to think about this later. Finally, they reached the stairs and ran upstairs, where they weren't bothered by Liam's earthen pillars anymore, as Liam was still making his way to the stairs and had lost line of sight to them, pulling Emma along. Emily quickly reached their parents' bedroom and crashed through this door as well. She released Emma's hand before running to the mantel across from the luxurious bed, where she tore a painting from the wall, revealing a keypad. She quickly punched in the code her parents had drilled into her brain many times. After all, kidnappings, break-ins, and home assaults by professional and dangerous criminals were real concerns for people like them. Seeing the keypad accept her code and a wall panel nearby sliding open, she sighed in relief, somehow having half expected it not to work. She grabbed her sister again and rushed into the newly opened room, where she hit a big red button that would not only close and secure the door, but also send an alarm to the security firm. Seeing the heavily reinforced door slide close just as Liam entered the room caused her to sigh in relief as she stuck up her middle finger and yelled, "Fuck you, you dickweed. Just wait for security to get here." She felt concerned, however, when she noticed the eerie smile on Liam's face as if all her efforts were for naught. Feeling anxious, she turned around, looking into the luxuriously decorated safe room, complete with paintings and furniture, but ignored it all. Instead, she ran to a security station and quickly activated a camera that monitored the situation outside the room. What she saw made her blood run cold. Liam took out his phone and called up some kind of file before he started typing a code into the keypad. For a moment, she feared the door would actually open, but she sighed in relief when it remained closed as the keypad gave an error sound. However, Liam didn't seem deterred as he simply looked at his phone and began filling in a second series of numbers, causing another error sound. Emily grew a little more confident now as she pressed a button next to a microphone and used it to contact a man. "Stop playing around, you walking cliché. Did you pick up that sinister act from a B-level horror movie? That code has way too many numbers for you to simply guess. You won't scare me." In response, Liam curled his lips in a wicked grin, his words carried to Emily through the sensors in the room. "Oh, I'm not playing around, my cute little Emily." He pursed his lips with diabolical amusement, You see, a few weeks ago, I tricked your parents into signing a little document that would assign me as guardian to you and your sister in case of their very unfortunate deaths. Then he shrugged in resignation. I mean, it would be hard to hold up in court, but I have plenty of friends in high places, talented lawyers, and resources to burn. He smirked at the world's broken laws. Combined with the fact that I'm a known friend of your parents, and you don't have any direct family that could take care of you, I would have won that case, even if you too would resist it. Not only would that have given me control of the both of you, but also of your inheritance. He laughed maniacally. So, I've been planning to kill your parents for a while now. He waved his phone in the camera's direction and continued. What I have here is a list of various codes currently used by your family security firm, which an informer got for me. I don't actually know which one is yours, but I know it's on here, and there are only about 100 codes on this thing. He looked straight at the camera as his grin widened. So sit tight. I'll be there soon.